really love making meals for my family and sticking to my grocery budget. I love even more whenever I can use those groceries to create meals at a low cost. So stay tuned, because in today's Frugal Tip Friday video, I am going to show you how I created a delicious and nutritious meal of chicken and dumplings for almost no cost. But before we jump into that, hi, if you're new here, my name is Kelly. I love sharing about all things frugal and simple living. I love to secondhand shop, and we are a family of 4 that lives in a mobile home of around 1,000 square feet. I recently did a small space living series, and I went through several areas of our home, and I showed you what exactly we keep and how we store these things. Several of you have said that this has been really helpful in your homes, so thank you so much for that feedback. So part of cooking and sticking to a budget and all of these things that are important to me, part of that is being a good steward of my resources. So somewhere along the way, I realized that maybe as I was trimming chicken for a meal, or as I was chopping up vegetables, I just noticed that I just had the waste, the extra bits that were not really being used. And I started to wonder, is there something that I could do to use these rather than just toss them out? Of course, there are many different ways to use vegetable scraps. You can do composting, but one thing that I wanted to try was making my own broth. And in that, I also wanted to include those bits of chicken that I kind of cut off whenever I am making a chicken dish. I realized whenever I was trimming chicken that there were times when I would trim off a piece and there was actually some good meat attached to that, some good chicken breast attached to that, and I just couldn't get it apart. But of course, once chicken is cooked, you can disassemble it more easily. So in today's video, I'm really gonna walk you through, and I'm gonna show you very real, very raw, how I made this meal, and it really turned out so delicious. It wasn't really a lot of work, and it was something that I could involve the kids in, so it's very much like a hands-on fun project. So I'm going to show you how I made the broth, and then I'm going to walk you through what I did with the chicken, and then I'm going to walk you through the dumplings. Now, of course, you don't have to make chicken and dumplings. You could make your own broth and use it for a myriad of recipes, but this is just one that you could choose. Now, as far as my chicken, I was able to get chicken from a couple of different areas. I did have that trimmings bag, like I said. Whenever I cook chicken breast and I am trimming it, I just put all of my discarded pieces in that bag and stick them in the freezer. But then also, we had used a rotisserie chicken for a recipe a few days prior, so I just put the entire rest of the rotisserie chicken in the crock pot as well underneath my vegetables. This recipe very much feels to me like those girl math things that you see where people sort of kind of justify their shopping habits. I think for the most part, I am pretty level-headed when it comes to money and math and balancing all of that kind of stuff, budgeting. But I will say something about when I cook from the freezer feels like I am eating for free. I don't know, does anybody else feel that? I know that I bought this food. But whenever I'm able to make meals from the freezer, it just feels like, oh, well, there's a free one. I know even though this meal was very low cost, I did buy the vegetables to go into it, and I did buy the chicken. But the whole point of it is this was created from items that otherwise would have just gotten tossed into the waste. So I feel really good about this. I feel like this is a very good, very frugal, and very useful recipe. All right, so as far as the broth, it really is very simple. It's vegetable peels and water. You can put spices in there if you want to. I chose not to, but it's very, very simple, and then you just let it cook in the crock pot. You could also do this in an Instant Pot. I'm sure there are many different tutorials online. I'm not going to lie, whenever I first looked it up, I was a little leery about including peels. It's just something that I've not done before, but I saw several places online, you know, recommending this, several food pages that I follow recommending this. So anyway, I gave it a try. One of them even mentioned to include the peels, such as onion peels, because it gives your broth a richer color. I never would have thought of this if I hadn't read that.
Once our broth has cooked in the crock pot for about 6 hours,
we are going to pour it into a strainer. So that way we're left with all of this beautiful broth, all of this beautiful flavor, and we can discard those peels. And then we will be left with the broth, and then of course we will pull our chicken out. So I've assembled all of my dumpling ingredients here. My dumpling recipe called for shortening, and I actually didn't happen to have any. So I took some butter, and we're going to use that instead. I pulled all of the chicken out, and it's just back there cooling so that I can handle it. And my butter, what I did was I didn't melt it, but I did just soften it. I wanted it to be as close in texture as possible to the vegetable shortening, and I thought that would probably achieve a really good result, and it did. I was really pleased with the consistency of these dumplings. So initially I just started out with my dry ingredients, and once I got those in the bowl and got them all incorporated, then I added my butter. And I used a fork just to kind of stir this around and get it to a consistency that was ready to take on the milk. And then from there I just kind of worked it. In this stage, if you need to, you can add additional flour. You want it to be a little bit tacky, but you really don't want a sticky dough, if that makes sense. So again, just work that butter in, or if you have Crisco. The steps are very similar to how you might make a pie crust. So we used the ruler per the recipe that we were looking at, just to try to get dumplings that were around the size that we needed. If I had to do this again, I would make them a little bit thinner, but they turned out just fine. My husband said that he liked them this way. So anyway, so I got the kids to carefully help me drop the dumplings into our broth, and you can see we really do have a dark color like we were talking about from those peels. So I don't know if you can tell, but this is a pretty large bowl, and this is that chicken that again would have just gotten discarded. This was from the rotisserie chicken, and these were my chicken trimmings that maybe were attached to maybe some tenderloin, or maybe some little pieces that I didn't want in my chicken breast. But because they were cooked, now I was able to sort of separate them. So lastly, I used some cornstarch and water to make a little bit of a slurry, and then I just let this simmer, and that allowed the broth to thicken slightly. And this is a totally optional step. This was just something that was mentioned that I saw online, and I thought that it would be nice to thicken up the broth just a little bit. So I know every family has their kind of traditions. Growing up, when we would have chicken and dumplings or chicken and noodles, we would always have it with crackers and cheese and pickles. So that is what I set out for us to have with our meal. And actually, let me tell you, I made the dumplings, and then after we ate, we had such an abundance of broth left. The dumplings weren't that hard to make. I just turned around and made a second batch of dumplings so that we wouldn't be left with all of this broth. And then this provided us with another meal the next day as leftovers. I know we're getting into spring, and so we're not so much thinking of soups and stews, but this is a really great one to pull out even on a rainy spring day. It was a really delicious meal. It was not difficult at all to pull together, and we will definitely be making this one again. All right, you guys, well, that is pretty much all for today's Frugal Tip Friday video. You will have to let me know down in the comments if you've ever tried this before, or if you plan on giving it a try. I will definitely be doing this again, and I already have that Ziploc bag going in the freezer with those vegetable peels. All right, you guys, well, that is it for this video. Thank you, as always, for taking a little bit of your valuable time and spending it at Yard Sale Squad. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.